Everyone's like, oh, look, here comes Pensy Joe bringing the Pennsylvania stuff because really test LED in the headlight, but we'll take this quite well by all. Regular combination, she's all that Sheet at 10. Proceed to 15. Hey everybody, this is Pensy Joe here, and today we're going to be doing an in-depth review for the Pennsylvania Railroad I1sa's, both the short tender version and the coast-to-coast tender version. Without further ado, let's get into the review. Alright, let's start with looking at the packaging. Now these are Broadway's recent packaging style that started pretty much around, pretty much during the pandemic with well, this is actually one of the first ones to actually have this new style of packaging. This locomotive, along with the Reading T1 and the Milwaukee S3, they were the forefronts that started this new packaging. And I think that there's only a few other models that Broadway came out with that had this dark green packaging like this with the cardboard plastic, pretty much with the cardboard sleeve like this, before they went with the more white version with the very, very slightly gray logo pattern that they had. Personally, I find that Broadway kind of cheapened out with the packaging, especially with models increasing in price. You know, I mean, I get why. I have heard, seen a couple of their videos about why they went with this decision. Personally, I think they should have stuck with the foam cradle. I'm okay with the ice cube, but with the extra foam protection, really helps with protecting small parts from getting loose and all that stuff, and it adds more cushion rather than the hard white foam that that's easily snappable and breakable that you've probably seen on other models and packaging as well. This is obviously the short tenders box. It's shorter than the long tender box. So without further ado, we'll slide this guy out. It's actually fairly easy to slide these out, so be careful how you hold these. It can be a pain in the butt. Well, actually, this is a little bit tighter than I thought. So I'm going to pause it right here, and then I'm going to do it because I'm only going to be using one hand to try and slide this out. So I'm going to try and use two hands to get it out without, making much of a fuss. Alrighty, now that the sleeve is off, we can take a look at the locomotive. There's a short tender right there. There's a locomotive itself right here as well. And if we look right in here, there's that white foam I was talking about. So it's not that soft black foam. You get your instructions right here, instruction manual. It's got its instruction sleeve with your typical warranty and all that stuff, which is fine. Still not as good as it used to be, the 2-year warranty that you could get in the older Broadway models back in Paragon 2 and around that era. But it is what it is. All right, let's take her out. So there we go. There was also a smoke unit funnel right here for your smoke fluid. These don't come with smoke fluid. You have to buy it separately or buy JD Steam or whatever. Well, it fell on the floor, but that's okay. But yeah, it comes with extra tires and the screw, the hex nuts. Yeah, pretty much the hex screw head screwdriver right here. So in case you got to replace your tires, which you shouldn't have to do it for a while, but you definitely want to keep them in the bag to make sure they don't dry out or anything like that. Otherwise, that becomes an issue. There we go. We're able to push this guy along the way out a bit. I'm going to keep trying, actually. Just trying to push it out. There we go. Pushing. And pretty soon it's, I don't want to get my hand stuck in here too. There we go. And then those should pop down, just like that. There we go. And we'll take this tab back here. You got this tab. Pretty normal on other ice cube ice cube packaging. And there you go. There's the locomotive. This is a post-war All of my I1s are post-war, so they have like the DGLE roof or black roof as they got dirty. And they just pretty much gave up repainting the roofs this brownish red color that they used to do on top of the roof. So they pretty much stopped doing that. They still do the oxide red on the tender decks on top. And there's a doghouse. I think this is one of the only steam engines I have that have the short tender with the doghouse. I'd like to get more of these if I can find them for a reasonable deal, or if Broadway makes these as a stealth line model, which these are perfect for stealth line. I mean, imagine these for like, shoot. Broadway was selling these for around $400, which before that was $350. So with DCC ready, $300, you could probably get it at retailers for like $270, $250 if they did stealth for this. Probably the lowest you can get is $200, which I would buy probably 3 more of these if I can get. If they do stealth for these for $200, I would buy them like in a heartbeat. And just plug and play with the decoder and add just solder the keep alive plus and minus to the board, and hopefully that should be all it. Or if I want to still gut it out, I could still gut it out and just hardwire it as well. I haven't gotten a stealth line model yet. The first stealth line models that I am getting are the RF-16s. So I'm getting an ABBA of single stripe RF-16s that are stealth. I'm curious to see how the lighting's going to work once I get a TCS WOW decoder for that. Hopefully it doesn't require too much programming. It should with TCS. You can program what each output can do and which color can do, which pin or whatever it chooses. It'll be interesting. I'll probably do a video on how that will work. Same thing with the steam engines. I pre-ordered also 3 Stealth Line Q2s. I got one of them is the prototype built, not 6131, but it's it's the one with the fantasy scheme, not the Tuscan red, but the DGLE one with the winged Pennsylvania on the pilot. And I got 2 production runs and road numbers that I do not have. So yes, I'm gonna have 5 Q2s at some point, but that's besides the point. More on this engine. Has the smoke unit. These are obviously smoke unit engines. This is plastic body, so just be careful when you're working, when you're modifying these or running smoke, especially smoke, because there's a lot of issues with the I1sa's having cracks on the smoke box and melting the smokestack itself from the smoke units. I understand Broadway says that there's like a recommended voltage level for their smoke units, and you could probably look it up on their you could probably look it up inside the manual itself, but I think it's also online as well. I just don't really like smoke units, to be honest with you, and that's just my personal peeve about it. I'm not going to run smoke with these models, although they do work, and you can see them online with smoke units working on these. I do not want to risk melting my smoke box and having boiler cracks. I do not want to deal with that personally. Eventually, all 3, I've done one of them. I've done one of my I1sa's with the coast-to-coast tender. I've gave that one TCS WOW, and these guys will also get TCS WOW. And I have 2 more kits available right now for Steam that are 4.6 decoders. And I'm going to put them in here with Keep Alive. So these guys are pretty much their decoders are on the chopping block right now with their smoke units. And there's an example of what the decoder looks like. It's basically a Paragon 3 board that's been revamped a bit, and it has Keep Alive capacitors. There's 3 on there. I'm not sure what that middle thing is. It's got like a copper coil in the middle. I'm not 100% sure what that is. And then there's the weight that's inside the boiler, and there's a smoke unit, and that's what the smoke unit looks like. It's got this rubber seal thing so that it doesn't leak smoke, though I've heard people say that sometimes it leaks smoke. But I guess because of contact or the heat or something, it just melts the top of the crown inside the hole, inside the stack right here, and it melts the boiler, which sucks. So Yeah, I mean the details look good. I mean the DGLE is almost like a grayish black, but it's actually green, and I'm pretty sure on the video you can definitely see that green color coming through. And this is a perfect DGLE in my opinion. Broadway does a really good job in their modern era like Broadway engines with the DGLE. I know that the M1s were slightly more green in the Paragon and Paragon 1 QSI era, but I think the I1 in the QSI era was not that very much different either. So I've had the QSI I1sa. It was a PCM era one, and unfortunately, I do not have it anymore. It's been a while now since I've had it, and I can't really compare it in with this one. All I know is that after the PCM era, they didn't have as tendency to have gear cracking issues because of the material change. So they probably changed when it came to their tooling. They changed the material of the gears that they used to make for axle gears. For anybody who owns a QSI, when it comes to those models, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. The question is when and if it's going to happen. And that's just something you have to take into mind. It doesn't mean it's going to happen when I warn you about it, but just keep in mind that generation tended to have issues. They were known for a couple of issues, including, the gear cracking problems. It doesn't mean you're necessarily going to have one, or if you get a used one, you might not even know that it had its axle gear replaced. So just keep that in mind. I haven't heard anything about the Paragon 4 or Paragon 3 or Paragon 2 I1sas having gear cracking issues. And I've already looked inside the gearbox for this model when I was doing the TCS WOW installation in my other video with one of the long tender ones. And it had, your typical gunmetal gray gears, which were the higher quality ABS plastic that they used. I'm not sure what was going on with the body shells this time around. I'm not sure, because some people say they had the plastic body steam engines and they didn't have any melting issues. I'm not sure what it is or why it is. It could be a factory issue at the time. As I'm currently looking, I don't see anything. And I haven't ran these in a while, by the way. I mean, this is one of the newest i1s that I had. I got this from the refurb shop, and heck, it was worth every penny. I mean, it was around $300. So, for $300, what do you get with the Paragon 4? Well, I don't know. I mean, for some reason, a lot of Broadway engines are like really loud, but the i1s in particular are rather really loud right out of the box. Which is very interesting. The details on this i1 are very spectacular for a lot of plastic parts. There's some brass as well with the grab irons and stuff. And there's like a hose going up to the dynamo up front as well. That's a brass piece that goes up and around behind the smokestack for the exhaust of it. That's pretty cool. I guess it's to help the draft out the exhaust of the dynamo. You also got your whistle shield with the really short little whistle right there. I think it's cold, so I think it's a plastic whistle. These are brass pop-off valves. The cab is removable. It's just clipped onto the firebox right around here. It's got an openable hatch, which is always nice. You got the realistic coal load, which everyone says is like real coal or something like that. And unfortunately, though, it does look like you can see a little bit of the glue in there that holds the coal down, but that's okay. It's not. You can always add some like dust or something on top to add more coal to it to make it look like it's got. It's not that like looks like it's got wet glue still in there. These are non-operable marker lights, which is fine. I have no issues with those. Some people might say those are a little bit oversized. Personally, it's not a real issue to me. I'm just glad that they have some, add some color to it with the marker lights. I do not plan to give these operable marker lights. I don't see any reason to. This is already good enough with the reflections, with the colors and whatnot. This is definitely one of my helper locomotives. And here's the interesting thing. There's 2 headlights in the rear. That is very interesting. I'm curious to see what's under here when I open up this tender. But there's a headlight right here as well. And there's also a middle headlight right here too. That is funky. I'm not sure why. I guess they didn't want to change the tooling because this is on a couple other locomotives as well, and yeah, it's quite funky. These air tanks in the front are rather interesting. They got like this gunmetal kind of like almost like poor plastic kind of look to them. I don't know. I think they're okay. Obviously, I'm not going to mess with those. Again, the details are pretty nice on this. I'm not sure which exact variation of the I1 this is. Obviously, Broadway calls it the I1sa. But what exactly it is, whoops, as you can see, yeah, it can clip off. So just be careful when you're carrying this locomotive, by the way. Let's get that out of the way. There we go. But yeah, just be careful because do not grab it by the cap because it pretty much clipped off on me. No, it's not broken. It's just it naturally can clip off. I guess if you hold it in a certain way and the weight just forces it to be clipped off. So just be careful. Try to hold it right here. I only have one hand, but I had rather under control. So before anybody starts yelling and screaming, relax and everything's fine. I like the suicide pilot right here. Couplers are not metal; they're plastic. I feel like they're not metal. Obviously, I think the hook those this fake hose thing right here. That's obviously metal, so you can uncouple it with an uncoupling tool. You got your coupler cut bar, which flaps up and down. Same thing in the back, moves up and down. It doesn't have that piece that Pro 2000 has, where it has like that extended bar that's on top that would pull the pin up and down. So it's not a huge thing. It's not gonna really bother me, but if you're like a hardcore modeler, it'll probably bother you. Let's take a look around the other side. Again, I'm gonna turn this guy around. There we go. There's a lot of wires on this. Yeah, this is here's your cable here. Actually, you know what? How about we just save ourselves the headache and just pull the cable out. Now I'm just using my nails just to try and there we go, free it without yanking the cord or the plug or anything. Obviously, whoever did the work on this from the factory did a fairly well job. It didn't look like these were already coming out somewhat, but it's not like anything looked like it was yanked or anything. Here's where you can see that screw, that stoker. There's a stoker right here that shows like a cutaway view of the stoker that would go inside the firebox. What's interesting inside the cab, if it focuses, it's probably not going to focus, but there's like a brake lever or some sort of lever that goes across that I saw that was on the coast-to-coast version. What I also find interesting is that there's windows right behind the driver and fireman. That is a little bit different to me. I got to think about it more about the cab with the windows like that. I'm pretty sure they're on the other cabs of the locomotives I have. I just have not recognized it, but yeah, that kind of strikes me as different. There's windows behind the driver and fireman. It's really interesting. Obviously, the windows do not roll like open and close. And this is 4578. It's got more of that gold leaf kind of coloring. Though this is a freight locomotive, and these would get dirty, so I don't know why they have the gold leaf instead of the the yellow color, like similar to that, or like the stripe right here. They have the gold leaf lettering. I'm not gonna really complain. It still looks good. It still looks good. It still looks like the thing, and it's not a huge problem for me. What I find interesting about this is it has this shelf right here. So this tender is not really symmetrical, which is nice. It's got like this lever thing right here to hold back the coal. I know there's a cat meowing in the background. Rear coupler cut lever, and there's that jeweled headlight. It's got two headlights. Two rear headlights. That's interesting. Door for this doesn't open, and it's obviously not lit in there. There's no crew figure in there. That would be cool to have like a crew figure in like the back. And oh look, there's like rungs on one side. That's pretty cool. Obviously, there's no train phone for this, which is interesting. Would it be cool for Broadway to offer like a variation of this where you can have, or you can like put in like separately applied like train phone or something. I'm not sure if these tenders had a lot of train phones on them, but it would be rather unique nonetheless. Again, there's some more piping details on top. On this side, we got you got the water heater. You got some of the water heaters around here. I think that's one of the, what is it called? The super. Trying to think. It's the SA. It's what the SA's designation stands for, but it helps with the steaming process a lot more than what it used to before, because these were built around, I believe, between 1910s and 1920s. The I1s. These guys are rather. They're not very, very late locomotive, but they're definitely one of America's biggest decapods, if not the biggest decapods. I mean, these things are huge. The tenders are pretty much the same size, if not longer than the I1 when it comes to the coast to coast. So that's what's really interesting about that. And here's the underside of the model. You got your typical Broadway brake linkage things that can be tabbed out. You got your on-off switch for the smoke unit, so it's your pretty much dead switch in case the functioning's acting funky and you really want your smoke unit to turn off. You can do that. You got a blind driver in the middle. To be honest, though, I think you could get away with. I mean, this is probably designed to go around 18 inches or 20 inches. But you probably could, with the articulation of the side-to-side movement for the wheels, you could probably, get away with these not being blind in the middle, which is also interestingly the gearbox or the axle gear is the which is the blind driver. I find it a little bit interesting. It's not a bad thing. One criticism I have always for Broadway, for most of their models, they do not paint the pilot wheels. It doesn't cost much just to add paint to it, Broadway. Just do that for your steam engines, don't leave them. That's not how they look like in real life. They're usually painted, or at least dark gunmetal or something like that. I mean, you do it for a lot of your brass hybrids, such as the Dreyfuss Hudson. You did it on the C&O Hudson. You did it on a couple of models. You even did it on Blue Line M1, and then for some reason before and after that, you didn't do that anymore. And even for your other, E6s, when I did a review on the E6, I had the Lindbergh engine, and that one had painted pilot wheels, but the other ones didn't. I'm like, well, just paint them black, even though they don't have the striping. Just paint them black like the other drive wheel set. So, yeah, it's just a personal thing I have about it, because at least it makes it look, more like it's a complete, painted model. But yeah, when it comes to the factory paint, this is pretty good. Obviously, you got the crew figures in there. There is no cab light. This is pretty much another rerun of the tooling that they had before. For the I1sa, it hasn't really changed that much, although there are differences. I know that the PCM model had some different piping up right around here than this one. And yeah, there were some minor differences. I don't know if there was major differences or minor differences between the generations, but it's quite similar to the K4, how they changed things around a bit with each generation, or different runs, or like pre-wars and post-wars. They change the tooling ever so slightly if it's not the same tooling. So I find that quite interesting personally. So without further ado, I'm going to go to the next section where we're going to look under the body of the locomotive to take a look and see what's going inside the gearbox. Alrighty, here's the underside of the gearbox, and as you can see, we got that gunmetal gray ABS plastic gear. I'm not really too worried about this kind of gear. Now, if you do have a PCM model, and you've seen the underside and you've seen the gear, you could probably tell they're very similar to each other. And what that means is you can probably get Broadway to give you a newer wheel set of these. Now the main issue of concern I have is if the hex nut for that wheel set that you get a new one for your PCM one, when they give you a new like wheel axle set, make sure the screw, the hex screw, that holds the linkages together. Make sure, okay, that it is compatible. Although, because here's the thing with the T1s. For some reason about the T1s, with the Pennsylvania T1s, Broadway has decided that they changed how the linkage is put together. And I believe it happened between the Paragon 2 era and Paragon 3 era. I think the Paragon 3 era had the different linkage. I don't have a Paragon 2, so until then, this is what I'm getting from Broadway's, choice of changing the tooling around for the drive linkages for how big or small or how it's set up with the spacers and stuff for the drive linkage. Because I know for Paragon 3, they do not have an extended like piece of the wheel that connects up to the drive linkage, similar in between like the middle drive wheel set. There's like a extended cylinder that comes out for screwing, the specific screw for the linkage over here. And that's what the Blue Line T1 that I have has. And I haven't tried a QSI, but I believe it's still the same linkage. It's just a different decoder. And I noticed the paint schemes are rather the same still. So, and the color hues and whatnot, and the font style. So I believe it has to do. You have to look at the generation when it comes to that. If anybody can tell me that the Paragon 4 or run of the spare parts can still be compatible with the other one, I mean, you probably have, if you really want to upgrade it, you might have to change all the linkage, get all the pieces for here and replace it on the QSI PCM one, which would suck. But I'm not 100% sure what the difference would be in terms of using the tool to replace, to get a spare from Broadway of these axle gears and to put it onto your PCM one. So if they are compatible and you know that, and you have an axle gear set from Broadway that looks rather like this, and you put it on your PCM, let me know and let others know, especially on the Facebook page for Broadway Limited Imports Collectors Club. Let everybody know so that people can know they can get spare parts and fix it themselves. Obviously, Broadway doesn't service the Paragon 1, and I believe they not service Blue Line as well. So if you want those parts, you really gotta either find one or order it, and hopefully it fits. Don't be afraid to ask Broadway. Say, hey, ask the service department. Hey, I don't know, you don't service these models anymore, but do you have a part? Do you have this specific axle gear that would fit on this generation of model? So that's a good question to figure out. So yeah, I think cat's meowing up a storm, right? So that's that with the underside. The next phase we're going to do is we're going to take off the shell of the model, which can be kind of a tedious process. The reason why I say that is because you have to screw here and you have to screw over here. And you got to be careful with the piping because it can be kind of hard to take out, and just make sure you got to be careful because some of those piping is plastic and it's wrapping itself under the boiler, the boiler shell. So there's two pieces. There's actually three main pieces. You got the frame that's right here. I don't really count this as a main piece. I just call it the gearbox cover. You got the main frame below. You got the shell that comes off that covers the gearbox, the motor, and everything else, pretty much the boiler and the cab. And then you got the in-between, bottom of the boiler, running board layer, where the running boards will come off the locomotive, and all you have below is just the chassis or the frame of the locomotive. So that's something to keep in mind. So I'm going to put this back on, and in the next segment I have this back and screwed up, and then we'll take a look pretty much between, and you're going to see the motor and you're going to see the gearbox tower itself. We're not going to really dig deep and go under to figure out where all the wires are going. That I saved for the TCS WOW installs part. But without further ado, yes, let's go look inside the boiler of the Locomotive. Okay, so I'm in the process of taking off the shell off. First thing to know, once you unscrew all 3 gears, pull from the front first. Yes, your steps might come off, your step bar might come off, but that's okay. It's always easy to put it back in. And before you pull any more, make sure that you pull these guys back because there's a hole right here. Pull them out and back out and push them to the side so that you can be able to get the cab off. See, and now it's more loose to get the cab off. Just make sure you know that before you start yanking. Otherwise, you could break something. So just let you know that, and then, so you don't break your model or anything like that. So without further ado, I'm going to end it right here, and I'm going to take the shell off. It's not going to be that really hard. Just finagle it a little bit. Just be careful. And then we'll take a look inside and comment about what's going on inside there. Alrighty, so now we got the shell off. You can see you got this it looks like it's actually a newer kind of version where it has like 4 plugs that you can put in there. As you can see on this side, it's got an empty plug. But this is that intermediate, like secondary decoder board that actuates and figures out all the information coming from all the way to the tender from the other decoder. And this is like a mini decoder. I'm not sure exactly what it does, but it regulates the smoke unit and the sensor information from the sensor over here. It's very interesting. A friend of mine, Trainman 440, wanted to try and figure out how it works, and it's not that simple. It's a rather complicated, tiny device. And I don't try to mess with it. I know some people want to figure out how to get it to work by using that and just change it to ESU or something like that to do the smoke stuff. So you got to pretty much talk to a Broadway insider in order to understand how that board specifically works. And even then, I'm not sure if they're going to tell you the secrets of how that works. So just letting you know. And here you go. You got this 5-pole motor right here. This is an HB 2721 FK 185R4. I'm not exactly what that means, but it just tells probably what it is. So I don't know what exactly. I don't know if it's a Hibouchi or something like that. I don't know if that what the brand is. If anybody knows what this brand of motor is, let me know. Tell me if you know if it's used in other things and if it's reliable or not, if it's really good, and so on and so forth. Another thing I noticed is that that screw hole looks rather cracked. That kind of sucks. It just goes to show how not so great this plastic quality is. The smoke unit's packed down up in there. And then there's a JST plug, a 2-pin JST plug that connects the headlight to the pretty much to the device over here. And then the headlight's up in there. The headlight is external and instead of internal for this Locomotive. I'm not going to yank everything out because I'm not doing a TCS WOW review. I'm just doing a simple review where we look at what we're looking at right here. And obviously, as I said, this is the middle layer. So obviously, there's some wires that goes under. It's not like other Broadway engines. I know there's another Broadway engine that's rather the same. I think the L1's like this as well. And then the wires go under. They go through the side under here. And then they go under the motor through the tunnel with the tape covering it. And then they go under here where these wires are going to the JST plug right here. And yeah, you're gonna have to unscrew the 2 screw holes in the bottom to get the motor off first, and you're gonna have to take off the gearbox tower with the worm gear in order to be able to get this piece off. So then you can hardwire and figure out where each wire goes. Because really, all you're gonna need is the 3.3 volt, and you're gonna need the ground wire to hook up directly to the headlight when you got all the stuff out. So that's just a heads up for those, you know, who want to hardwire this engine. You will need to you will need to unscrew this. Make sure you don't yank it off from these two wires, otherwise you got to resolder it. And you're gonna have to unscrew this while this is still attached. So it's gonna, if you've seen my TCS WOW install for this, which I recommend you see, you'll see the process of how it is to work on the Locomotive. The tender has more space, so I didn't really get into that much detail on that one. But for when I do the TCS WOW for this, be sure, because I will definitely figure out, you know, how much space you have to really work with this. You know, it's a rather small tender, and we got to see how much space we really have inside this. So now packet's going to be. So yeah, that's pretty much what it looks like inside this Locomotive. As you can see, there's nothing going back to the cab to do any, you know, firebox flicker. You could drill a tiny hole in the corner and maybe do a makeshift, like, you know, cab light somewhere in there, but you definitely want to be skilled. But here's the bright side. If you do want to do that, you can actually remove the cab from the boiler itself, because it's just a clip-on. It just snaps onto this. So it just snaps onto the boiler. And you can see there's the grooves right there and on the other side, which tells me that this needs to move forward because it's not exactly clamped down, but I can always fix that. But yeah, it's actually easy to take the cab off, so you can be able to do like a firebox. Well, not really you can't really do a firebox flicker. You're going to have to do some really small Dremel work, but even then, you have so very little space to do a firebox flicker through the grate in the front. So unfortunately, that's just not doable. And if you want to do a firebox flicker, there's no point. There's no way for the light to go down under here or anything like that. So this is not really the type of model you want to do a firebox flicker for, without it being extremely bright, because LEDs can be rather bright, and that's technically what they're going to be, unless you have some sort of device or like LED that has a lot of resistance so it doesn't shine brightly. But without doing some modifications, you know, adding some extra modifications, you know, I just try to keep it simple. So that's that. Anywho, that's what it looks like inside an engine. And then the next thing we're going to do is close it back up, and then we're going to take a look inside the tender. One more thing before we get to the tender, make sure you get these piping back into these holes, specific holes right here. Same thing on the other side. I think there's one more. Just make sure the piping goes where it's supposed to go. Otherwise, you might damage, well, you probably will damage the piping. So make sure you bend these back into the holes that they went through before you put the shell completely on. Okay, so I finally, after 5 minutes, got to pry this thing off. This is a clip-on shell. This is not a screw-on shell, as it's indicated here. There's some screw holes here. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, kind of sucks. So yep, this is definitely one of those where you're going to have to try and dig one side and just use this to try and pry it, but not too much, but pry and then try and up it at the same time. And it will come off, but again, just be patient and be careful when you take off the shell so you can look inside. But yeah, I don't know, when the shell's on, I'm trying to get at a good idea. Let me get it this way. So this is pretty much about how much room you got inside there. It's got a little bit of a dome inside this plastic. So you do have room to do to fit a capacitor in here and a TCS WOW board in here. So there's definitely a good amount of room in here to add TCS and to be able to do the Keep Alive extra pack as well for the TCS. So this is not too small of a tender. And I have dealt with the tighter tenders. The tightest tender is definitely the E6. Your TCS WOW kit with the Keep Alive, it will be packed tight inside there. So definitely make sure there's electrical tape so that nothing's contacting metal and inside the E6 tender. And this is basically a tall E6 tender with an extra room up inside there. So I would keep this metal plate just to simply try to hold down the speakers so they don't ring around inside there. When you take this off, if you're doing a TCS WOW install or whatever install, you will do all the unplugging, and obviously there's only the headlight right here, which again is that big headlight up there. You're only going to really need the LEDs for this. It's already plus and minus, so it's simple as that. For the I1, for the Locomotive, when you do the left and right, I recommend keeping the JST plug there and just using the wires on the other end of the female part of the JST plug to then use as wires that go all the way to the JST plug that connects to here and that goes to your TCS WOW decoder inside here. So yeah, I mean, it's just smaller. It's a smaller tender compared to the coast-to-coast tender. This is what you're going to have inside there. This is that tape you're probably going to want to use to hold down, wires or, your TCS WOW decoder down, so there's a lot of space. So space is limited in here. Cut at a good enough length so that you have enough in case you make mistakes when you fray the wires off, or if you have to redo some wiring. Just make sure you give it yourself enough, but not a lot, so that you don't have wires just fumbling around in here as like a rat's nest or something like that. That's something I used to do when I started doing TCS WOWs installs, so I try to minimize that now as much as possible. I don't have any issues with the older models. It's just that it's kind of fun to try and stuff everything back without pinching wires when you're done doing a TCS WOW job, or if you're doing maintenance, or in my case, if you have the Q2s from Paragon 2, I reused the JST plug for the firebox for the headlight, and there's a JST plug there, and I reused that similar to how the I1s have the JST plug for the headlight. I reused that to do the firebox flicker, as the firebox flicker is plus and minus, just to go in a tender. So when I get those out of the box, I have to open up the tender to reconnect it to the JST, so that I can complete the circuit and use the firebox flicker again. So that's how that works, because there's only it was only an 8-pin thin board, and it already had the firebox flicker and the headlight. But the problem with the firebox flicker is that it has to be on a separate circuit compared to the cab light that it had and the headlight. So that's that. But anyways, that's pretty much what it is. That's, if you see my other engines, it's the same thing. They have marker lights with a cab light and a headlight. I have to have like separate wires that permanently connect the locomotive and tender together in order to do the firebox flicker on top of that as well, for 4 lighting functions on one locomotive is I guess too much for Broadway, but I'd love Broadway to do firebox flicker at some point. I think that would be really neat to see in HO. They don't really have to change much tooling for their older models, specifically the K4 and the T1. There are ways to make the firebox flicker for that, and there's a couple other models as well, such as let me try to think for a second. The Dreyfuss Hudson could do one. I think there's a couple other models. Oh no, not the I1, not the L1. But yeah. So anyways, I'm going to close up the tender and we're going to do a test run. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. Little coast-to-coast tender. As you can see, the coast-to-coast tender is pretty much the same length, if not actually slightly longer than the I1. It is amazing that the Pennsylvania decided to give the I1s this massive tender, and I can understand why. These were coal hoggers, and having this much coal and this much water to go up and down the mountains is definitely crucial. And the C2C tender is a really, really cool tender. I mean, it's just, there's not many like it out there. I mean, not even like, there's not a lot of other tenders that are as big as this out there. And we can probably argue that this is the biggest, or in terms of the length, tender, that was on American rails. And as you can see, it has a train phone on here, which is pretty good detail. I'm not sure if that was there, though. Probably was. It's very sparse on here, except the ladder. Not sure what this is right here. That's an interesting piece. If anybody knows what that is, feel feel free to share what that piece actually is. There's 2 water hatches. They do not open, obviously. And here is the big doghouse that they use on the C2C tenders. Now, they did have this doghouse on shorter tenders as well. It's just not as common. It kind of looks funky, but they have had them on them from time to time. This is the same C2C tender that you'll see with the J1, which Broadway has yet to bring back the J. This tender is pretty much one of those like tenders that Broadway can reuse the tooling for many times. Especially that, the T1 pretty much has this tender as well. And if Broadway wanted to do a D-Streamline Fantasy T1, which never really existed, but there was art done to show what T1 would look like D-Streamline, which is basically rather similar to it's basically going to look a lot like the Q2, but it's going to have like this extra space in the front, kind of like the I1. It would probably be an uglier passenger engine. Some people find that T1's rather controversial in terms of looks. Some people like it. Some people say it's ugly. I disagree. I think it's a really, really fascinating looking steam engine. Without the streamlining, I'm not sure. It would look like it would have to be in like fast freight duty because of just how unique it looks. And it probably could do some freight duty, but to each their own, right? So obviously the Q2s had the coast to coast tender like this, and this is a pretty hefty tender. This is a pretty heavy tender. It's got a metal chassis, and obviously it's like pretty much almost twice the length of this tender. I mean, it's pretty much almost twice the length of the shorter tender variants. And by the way, I have this slightly open because I know I don't really want to close it completely yet because it's a pain in the butt to open again. So the reason why I have it like that is so that I can do TCS WOW sometime after this video. So yeah, it really is a really cool looking tender. I really like how the coal load's higher on this. I wish the coal load was rather high on the short tender variants, just like the coast to coast tender right here, because it looks nice. That coal load looks really nice, especially behind the I1. And there's something really different with the I1, with this one and the other one. It's the same locomotive. Nothing's different at all. It's just same engine, just has a different tender as a set. There are no marker lights in the rear. It does have a reverse headlight that does work. There's no doghouse light as well. But if you've seen my recent TCS WOW install, if you haven't, go check it out. I have added, pretty much drilled these holes back here for the tender, and I had to make sure to line up perfect, as close as possible to the center of this plastic, fake, marker light as possible on both sides, so that when I put the LEDs in the top left corners, they would shine out right. And it would look good, and they did look good. I really like adding the marker lights to this tender, and I'm going to see if I can do that with the other tenders as well for my T1s and my J1 at some point. The Q2s and my S2 already have them, but yeah, this is definitely something that's a fairly fun mod to do, is to add marker lights to these tenders. You could probably drill a hole so you can do a doghouse light. That's totally up to you. I don't think I'm going to do that. I mean, I could do it at some point if I wanted to, but I don't have any small LEDs to really go in there that are just not obnoxiously big or anything. And I could probably put a seat in there and like a crew figure in there as well, which would be pretty cool. Add some brakemen inside these dog-houses. Which adds some life to the dog houses. Otherwise, they're just there. But yeah, that's the one thing I almost forgot to talk about is the C2C tender. It's got a water scoop as well. Most of the Pennsy locomotives have a water scoop under them. So yeah, I mean it's a tooling that's been used so many times. This coast to coast tender, it's fairly old. It's probably the same. It's been around since the PCM, I believe, as well, PCM era. So not much has probably changed. If anybody spot any differences, please let me know. It looks very similar to the J1 that I have as well. So yeah, now without further ado, we can take these locomotives down to the layout and test run them. Alrighty, so now that we're down in the basement, I have my TCS WOW equipped I1 that I've done, and I got 4258. I had to look for a second as well right here. This is 4390, and this is 4578. So we're going to fire up 4578 by pressing F9, which is strange. I don't think she's programmed yet. No, I probably did not program her yet. Whoops. Well, let's go back to 3. Obviously, that's the whistle for her. There we go. Yeah, if we go to 1, look at the difference between TCS WOW. Look at the difference between TCS WOW at 1% compared to Broadway. Yeah, I think TCS WOW definitely won on this side. And obviously the headlights are bright. No, not the headlight, but the sounds are. Headlights on for this engine. And we got the rear marker light right there. At this point, I realized that the audio is not really working right now. But as you can see, these are the rear headlights, and there's my marker lights that I done for the other I1, number 4390 on their Coast to Coast tender. And here we are back over here, just watching them, just going around, backing up. I don't know if you guys can hear the difference, but you can tell that the TCS WOW equipped sound has a more crisp sound than the Broadway Paragon 4 sound. Now we're going to try function 25. Now I have to admit, Broadway's single chime Banshee whistle for the Pennsylvania is pretty close. If we go back and press F2. But to be honest, I really do prefer TCS WOW. I think their Banshee's pretty spot on. I used to say Broadway's was really close in the past, but now that I've experienced pretty much TCS WOW a lot more, and not hearing pretty much of Broadway's single notes anymore, I really have to say that TCS has just knocked it out of the park when it comes to sounds and how realistic and crisp they sound. But that's just Broadway's, engine doing a small blowdown right now. And it doesn't sound as modern as TCS's. TCS's is a lot clearer. It's a lot more real compared to Broadway's sound. So let's move forward. And you can already tell the difference of the sound. And Broadway's is just jittering more. This one's not jittering. I can feel the motor spinning, but this one feels like the motor's pulsing. And it's a little bit more jittery. You may not see it in the video, but in person it's a lot it just feels a little bit more jittery. And obviously the pilot wheel's off. But yeah, that's what I noticed. Very interesting. And there's TCS well equipped. I mean, again, this is at like 3%, and it's just got better motor control. I mean, this engine, not even jittering compared to the Broadway one. There we go, you got those nice marker lights. Again, that whistle, in my opinion, is just so much better. I haven't programmed this engine yet either. I got a program after putting, doing TCS well in them. But yeah, as you can see, it's just not even night and day when it comes to motor performance and like the speed steps. TCS just knocks it out of the park. And that pop-off sound is just nice and crisp. Give it a little bit more speed. They're pretty almost matched at 10% now. I think the TCS is slightly faster. Obviously got momentum on the other. But yeah, this sound that they use for chuffing is used a lot on other Broadway engines too, and that's what bothers me, is that there's no variety. And TCS gives you a variety of chuff sets to use for your model. And this is chuff set 2 for TCS WOW, by the way. It just matches that heaviness for the I1 and that brutish. And there you go, it just glides to a stop because of that momentum. And obviously that air pump is just pounding away. I mean, you don't really hear air pump as much for the TCS WOW one, because the air pump doesn't have to always be on. As far as I understand. But that's the clanking sound for the reverser. You don't really hear the reversing clank on TCS, which is fine, because you're not going to really hear that much. But basically, to tell that you're reversing or using the reverser is just the steam release for TCS WOW. Well, you got a clanking sound for the Broadway one. And don't get me wrong, it's not bad that they have that. I just think that it's a little bit too loud. I mean, it's almost like it's a little bit too loud. But it's fine for what it is. So we're gonna reverse them again. Go back to 10%. I mean, you just can't compare motor control when it comes to TCS and Broadway. I mean, TCS is, even though they're specified for train controls and with decoders and whatnot, in my opinion, they have the best motor control for steam, and possibly for diesel as well. I know a lot of people like Loc sound, but I'll be honest, I wouldn't put a Loc sound in the I1s. The I1s, with TCS is, in my opinion, it's the best choice. You can put Loc sound, and I believe you can get a sound file for the PRR hooter for it. Though, what you get right out of the box, TCS is better without needing a programming track. The only time you really need a programming track, I believe, is just for programming the address of the locomotive. I haven't really looked at it too much to see if you can use TCS to use the address by not having to go on a programming track to change it. So, but that's maybe the only thing. ESU, if you want to change the volume or anything like that, you have to buy the ESU. You have to buy the ESU programming system and have the program downloaded on your computer. But once you do that one-time purchase, you don't have to deal with it anymore. However, all you need is a controller, like this right here, this DCS52 Zephyr controller, the digital one, and you're good to go. And you can just swap the wires around just to go on to programming and you can program your I1's address, and that's it. Everything else in terms of programming you can just do by pressing the 8 button a number of times. And I'm not just going to say just do that. There's also an instruction manual when you get a TCS WOW kit on how to go through the menus and whatnot. And yes, some people don't like the voiceover thing, but personally, I don't really care. It's so much simpler to use, in my opinion, and that is just a huge plus to me. Broadway, you have to use a programming track if you want to change all the sounds and whatnot. Or if you want to change the volume, you have to use a programming track. And unfortunately, I'm just going to have to say this again. Broadway is just not as, industry leading as they say they are. Which they need to watch what they say because, TCS and ESU are the top in my and in a lot of people's view for decoders. There's no comparison. Sure, Broadway has the reed switch, the smoke unit, and whatnot, so they have smoke. Whoop-de-doo. ESU can do smoke. They can. Broadway's excuse to get rid of ESU in the beginning was because they didn't do smoke, and QSI at the time does. Nowadays, ESU can do smoke. A lot of European models have it. I'm surprised Broadway hasn't even considered trying them again. I mean, yeah, I'm pretty sure the money, but here's the thing: they don't even need their own research and development for their own decoders anymore. And hopefully that would also just drop the price a bit for the models themselves because it's not in-house. But however, they're not going to really change the Paragon 4 stuff. So, it's already spent, after a couple, model runs with the research and development for the decoder being changed and whatnot. So, that's that. On the plus side, though, Broadway's now offering DCC-ready models. And I'm very happy about that. And as I've stated earlier in the review, yes, I've pre-ordered a number of models already that are Pennsylvania to be DCC ready. We don't need this on anymore. So, I'll make them quiet for a bit. And the steam engine's still making sounds, which is amazing. The keep alive is great. But the point is that, it's a shame that Broadway got rid of DCC Ready in the beginning because it wasn't doing so well. But we're now in an era where, you don't want to be stuck with no option. And it's really just the ability to have the option of DCC sound and DCC Ready. Not just because of price, but because of, product preference of what you like as electronics. A lot of manufacturers out there, as much as they would like to argue there's a reason why. And don't get me wrong, if I understand what Bob Grubb wants to do, he likes to do that Lionel. He came from Lionel. He wants to bring all those features and stuff. But the problem is that O scale with Lionel MTH were a different type of animal. If you're a Lionel guy, you're typically a Lionel guy. If you're an MTH guy, you're typically an MTH guy. And if you wanted to do both, you'd have MTH DCS system, and you would also have the Lionel system, the legacy system, so they can be intercompatible. The problem with the Lionel is that they didn't want to be able to share their compatibility completely with MTH, and really they were the only main two companies that really did a lot of stuff for their third rail, 3-rail, system. Atlas was around, but they weren't as big as, the other two. And, nowadays you have Atherin, who still uses Tsunami, which I personally think Atherin should just abandon, in my opinion. No offense to Tsunami, you guys really need to upgrade your game. But that's besides the point. We're talking about these models. When it comes to the Broadway and the Paragon system, I understand that it's supposed to be like the Lionel of HO, which technically it is. However, MTH doesn't exist anymore in HO market. Scale Trains is doing that, and Scale Trains is bringing ESU in. So this is where things are going to get really interesting in the next couple of years, since the 611 or the Norfolk and Western J is going to be coming soon this year from Scale Trains. I'm curious to see how good that model will be. Even though it had MTH's tooling, it shouldn't be mechanically unreliable. I'm really curious to see what the electronics are, and I'm very, very curious to see what they offer DCC ready and DCC sound, because if they offer both, that will tell us a lot of what Scale Trains' game plan and what Broadway might have to do to adapt. Broadway is talking about doing another Paragon generation again. And let's not forget, Paragon 2 has only been around, Paragon 4, I'm sorry, not Paragon 2. Paragon 4 has been around for only a few years compared to Paragon 3 and Paragon 2 and even QSI. They've been around for at least 5 years or 7 years. Paragon 3 was one of the longer ones as well. And now you got Paragon 4, which has only been around for, I think, 2 or 3 years now. Maybe even 4, correct me if I'm wrong. So that brings an interesting, realization that Broadway is actually listening now. I know they do the research when it comes to figure out what models and toolings that people want to see be made for HO, for steam engines. And I know a lot of people want to do this and this and that. Broadway's known for making steam engines, and there's no really other company right now that competes with them to make steam engines that are rather affordable, that people can try and get. I mean, brass hybrids, oh my gosh, they're pretty expensive now, but now they have DCC ready. If you find a good dealer, you can get them for a pretty fair deal. Yeah, you have to buy decoders for them, but what you get is that you get, hopefully, for the most part, Broadway's mechanical design is fairly reliable. I've seen and watched a couple of YouTubers who talked about the Blue Goose with their pickup issue. Some people found that there were shorting issues. In my opinion, they should just put TCS WOW on them. I know that Blue Goose is coming back again. Hopefully in this run they actually fix that issue. I doubt it, but I'd be surprised what people say from the reviews on the pickups and whatnot for the later run once they do that. I want to see what people say. It's kind of a shame that I heard the Black Goose is not coming back, because I was actually very interested in the Black Goose. But after hearing, the pickup issue and the possible shorting problems, I don't really want to get a Blue Goose. And I don't really model Santa Fe, but I really liked, the What If Black Goose, because it makes sense. If Santa Fe was like, I'm done repainting this damn blue color on the Blue Goose, they would just paint it black and maybe have a silver or aluminum stripe or just full on black. Well, it's still streamlined. And that's a fantasy scheme I can get behind. But yeah, to round up this review in terms of Broadway and what I still believe they should still improve on, if they're going to do sound and the smoke and stuff for the sound and DCC stuff, because I know people still like that stuff, and I know it's still a big part of their market, because that's what they were saying from the polls. And when they did that whole, consumer feedback or customer feedback program they did months ago, personally, I think that's a little bit stretched because, a lot of people have been seeing a lot of faults in Broadway, and it's everybody has a plague in their company, and it is what it is. And sometimes it's the factories that they work at, or that they're in contract with, or whatever. And it's just there are just many variables that can explain why things are not going the way they should be compared to other companies. I mean, Scale Train still has some certain issues when it comes to details. I heard about. I mean, they fixed it. They sent their models back when it came to the Dash 9 Vivid Counter issue that was going on a while back, and not that far back, but sometime back. And they sent it back and they said, this is not acceptable. Our customers are not going to like this. And there was some that got out there that customers talked about. And yeah, they said, no, you guys need to get this right this time. And I'm not saying Scale Train is perfect. All right. I'm not saying they're, the greatest company out there. But at least they sound like they show that they seem to care. I'm not saying Broadway or Bob or anybody doesn't really care. Though I don't really like that, sense of like, I know what a majority of the people are going to want. Because here's the thing, right? Why do I put TCS WOW on my steam engines? One, I'm a steam era guy. And two, I don't want to always, rely on brass engines. Now, you can work on brass engines. However, they require a lot more time and a lot more resource to put into them. Now, some people can argue, well, if you get a Broadway engine, you're putting more resource in terms of money to get the engine and to then just put TCS in it. However, there are brands of brass engines you can't get out there that are fairly priced, such as Sunset. But then, to get the cheaper subsets, you either have to get one that's used or you have to get one that's unpainted, and then you got to get into painting. And painting is a fun thing to learn. It can be very difficult sometimes because there's so many styles and ways that you can figure it out and how to do it. But then again, it's just it could be tedious if you're not skilled. And I think that one of the major problems with Steam is that not a lot of people are really alive anymore. And so there's fewer companies that do Steam now, because I guess a lot of the companies like Athearn just don't see to see the demand for Steam. While Broadway, they've done a great service with making so many different models and so many toolings. It's great for the community in this niche hobby that we all share. And I know a lot of people in the Broadway community don't like Pennsylvania because they're tired of seeing Pennsylvania, even though in the company name itself, it's Broadway Limited Imports, and they have a keystone as their logo. It's great. I mean, it's right in the name. So you're going to expect what most of the products are really going to be about. And I'm grateful, and we're really lucky, the PRR community, to have, so many make models for us. And there's another reason why the Pennsylvania's, got a lot of models. I mean, just look at history and how iconic these engines are. The I1 is very iconic for many different reasons. I mean, it was a bouncing son of a bitch, and excuse my French, but it was. They were not a really fun locomotive to ride around in, especially in reverse. There were no trailing truck. It's not a 210-2, it's a 210-0. And that cab is pretty far back from the rear axle. So, it's one of those engines that are iconic, and how powerful it was, and just sort of the region where it was. Pennsylvania was one of the first railroads in the country, first of all. Second of all, it was not the greatest railroad of the world. It may not always be the standard railroad of the world, but they had this sense of integrity to them that they give off, and their engines were well quite known, and a lot of companies that imported brass were stationed in Pennsylvania. So a lot of the models that you would see on brasstrains.com, for example, had a lot of their headquarters in the northeastern area in the Rust Belt. And a lot of models in companies tend to, be in Pennsylvania, and they made a lot of Pennsylvania stuff. I mean, yes, I do agree that the New York Central is criminally underrated in terms of the HO market because of all their engines. I mean, there's nobody makes the L class Mohawks anymore, which is crazy. The Mohawks were very famous. I mean, it's interesting that the most well-known Mohawk classes is not the MT4 or from the Southern Pacific. It's the two rivaling railroads in the Northeast. It's the Mohawk, the L class, and the M class, which was only two really. Well, it's really one class, but a version of that class, which is the M1A, and M1B, because they were perfect the way they are. And not only that, as soon as the M1, I mean, the M1 was pretty much as modern as it going to get to replace the K4 in terms of traditional steam engine design, to really go on the, over the mountains west of Harrisburg. So it's very interesting. I understand a lot of people want to see other models, and we're grateful that we get these models. And I know people are like, well, this is the I1 review. Well, when it comes to this review, and whenever I do a Broadway Limited imports review, keep in mind that Broadway is only for most of the models that they make. No other company makes them. No other company makes them. And we're lucky that most of those engines that nobody else makes are not junk, because usually when you're pretty much a monopoly and in any business, you basically have the sense of overconfidence that nobody can find anything else better because there's no alternative. Well, brass is the alternative. Bob and everybody else knows, and I'm not saying Bob is slipping up. Maybe there is some things he did slip up in. I will call out what needs to be called out, especially for the plastic, quality on the boiler shells for the I1s this time around. They crack, and then they're really fragile. Especially, I mean, all I did was unscrew the front screw for the boiler for this particular engine, and the stub that that the screw goes up into, that screws into, shattered. It doesn't really screw all the way anymore, so it only has really two screws that are useful now, which I'm like, what the hell, So, that is unexcusable. I hope they fix this in a later run for DCC ready, because I'll buy a couple more, because I like the I1s, and on my railroad there's going to be a coal mine, and there's going to be a lot of power plants that are going to need coal, and a couple other businesses that they need coal for their boiler rooms. So it will be important to have these hogs running around pushing and pulling coal trains around the layout. So and it's a shame that there's some quality issues on the I1's shell. Luckily, there's nothing I've had issue with the drivetrain yet, and I have seen nobody else talk about the mechanical part of it yet. So that's great to know. That's the main thing I'm worried about, is the mechanical and the frame. But this plastic shell problem is not good, especially with the smoke unit. I mean, I know there's a guy he's a smoke guy. He's got nice long hair. He knows how to smoke units and all that stuff. And I understand, and I appreciate for him to try to educate people about the smoke units, how they're designed, what their design constraints are, and what they're, what can they be fully capable of. However, while that's great and all, I still see problems, and nowadays, I've seen people, there's a particular YouTuber that I know. He's a really interesting guy. He has his own issues with Broadway as well. And he's gotten a lot of brass engines, that the brass hybrids that they made. And he's had models, even the E6, the Pennsylvania E6, and that one has smoke coming out, leaking through the shell on the bottom. And, and that's a fairly new model, I mean, it's technically still new. It came out late last year. But the point, or actually, no, early this year. I'm sorry. It came out early this year. It's hard to remember now. All I know is I have an E6, and I've got it out and put TCS in it, and have a lot of more fun with that. But yeah, it's just when it comes to quality, Broadway's drivetrain quality is fairly reliable nowadays than, let's say, during the early QSI days and their late PCM days. Since then, Blue Line and newer, I haven't really seen any major issues. It's just, which is good. It's just really a shame when it comes to sometimes the shell quality. And it's surprising that the shell quality is bad now. And the smoke unit quality has been a problem I heard ever since Paragon 2 with the T1, having a melted boiler sometimes. And it's a shame that the smoke unit can't have a wider range of tolerance before getting really hot. I'm pretty sure there might be a way to fix that because, it is possible. But when you're getting to HO scale and doing smoke units, it's small enough and tight enough. I mean, Broadway figured out how to put a smoke unit in an N scale, which is amazing. It's cool. I think it's cool, but it's not long-term reliable in my eyes. Some people might disagree, and that's fine, but in my eyes, it just isn't, and that's an opinion right there. And for these engines, I'm taking all their smoke units out. I don't need them, and I can always stuff more weight in there to counterbalance that smoke unit loss. Even though smoke unit's not that really heavy anyways, I can just put regular weights in there and have more traction and more forward weight so that it can't lift up easily on poorer track. My track, I'm making sure it's not going to be poor at all. But let's say I go to a club layout and it's got some poor track. I don't want it just lifting off because there's not enough weight in the front, causing derailments. And then everyone knows how annoying and frustrating it is when your model derails. It's not fun. Just how annoying and frustrating it is in real life. Anywho, I don't want to ramble too long anymore. Overall, what would I give for these Broadway engines? For these I1 decapods, for the price they came out back in October, I believe, last year, they were about, or I think last year or the year before, they were $400. They were around $400 at the stores. In my opinion, that is high. For these models. These toolings are really old. They're fairly old. They're about 20 years old. I'm not sure what mainly changed except maybe the materials of the plastics, but, and some of the details have been added and subtracted throughout the generations. They haven't really added much. You don't really need marker lights, forward marker lights. I mean, the marker lights are really up here. Classification lights, those are really tiny. You don't really necessarily have to, add anything to them. It would be cool if they were painted or jeweled, one or the other. It'd be cool just to have, a red or white, like a Bachmann does it. It does something. So, yeah, I mean, when it comes to the model, it doesn't really have any rear marker lights. I mean, it has marker lights in the short tender. But the reason why I know they didn't do marker lights for a short tender is because they don't have marker lights for the long haul tender. Which, let's be real, guys, the long haul tender deserves marker lights on all the Broadway engines that use the C2C tender. It needs an update, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't cost much to just add 2 holes to the back of the C2C tender and add like an extension metal like structure that does like a little board that has LEDs, that has 3 LEDs on it to do the rear headlight and the 2 marker lights in the rear. Come on. It's just a small upgrade that would add more function to the model instead of just headlight, rear headlight, and that's it. There's no cab light, and this is a plastic shell, so you can easily screw and then just glue the LED to the top of the cab. Even though the cab is removable, but still, my point still stands. Like, you still have room to just add some, more functions for a $400 model. And even then, you can get an E6 for around $400 and not have to pay $480, which is ridiculous for a Pennsylvania E6. And then, yes, it has a die-cast boiler, but for $80 more compared to this, where it has a plastic boiler and it can have, and it's even then you got to be careful about the plastic when the smoke unit's used. Yeah, I don't agree with that price. Realistically, these are like $350 max or $300. Considering it's just a rerun, and I'm glad I got this for $300. The other two I got for $400 because I really wanted them. And I didn't know if they were going to be taking up that much, which they were pretty popular. But I'm glad I got 3 of them. They will be great for when they're going to be used in the future once I get my layout set up. And it's just one of those models I really think deserves more. Hopefully in a later run, I doubt it, but it would be nice if they added some more lighting functions. Maybe update the bottom shell piece for this model and add like a hole so you can do firebox flicker or something. Change it a little bit, and I understand it's going to cost money to change the tooling around, but it updates the model more. And for Broadway, do not slip on shell quality. And, of course, never slip up on the mechanical and frame quality as well. Don't ever drop the ball like this again. And with that being said, I say this model is a solid, well, usually, if you know me, it's going to be a 6 out of 10. Most of the points are for the drivetrain quality. It's got a 5-pole motor in there. I haven't heard any issues of the 5-pole motors for Paragon 4 engines failing. Even the decoders are not failing as much either. It's really the smoke unit that's dragging it down. The details are really nice on this model. It's a very well detailed model. However, the tooling is rather old on the coast-to-coast tender. It has the option to have marker lights. Why not just add marker lights to them? It wouldn't cost much to just drill 2 holes and just 2 LEDs to it. I mean, come on, man. And for this, you could have these marker lights lit up as well. I mean, honestly, you really can. A short tenders, I think, is fine. I wish they had the screws back, though. I don't like that it's a clip-on because this thing is a pain in the butt. The coast-to-coast tender, easy to take off. You put your finger in there on the metal frame tab and the shell and just pop up. It comes off easier than this. This is a nightmare to take off with the tabs. Just use the screws. They're easier. Screws are not that expensive, especially these small screws. Come on now. They're probably not even a cent. Like, come on. You can't be that, cost saving just for 4 screws. Come on, man. I can understand the coast-to-coast tender. That one's easier to take off. You don't have to change that. But when it comes to the short tender, just stick with the screws, please. It's not fun. And yeah, guys, that wraps up my my in-depth review for the Paragon 4 PRR I1sa. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it was really long. This is a longer one than usual. I had to show the long haul tender, and I wanted to compare TCS. And I understand that the headlight was not working. I'm going to try something different this time around. For some reason this time around, something's kind of funky, and I got to figure it out when I do these next. I'm going to make sure I figure out, I'm instead of like doing like a resistor, I'm just going to have it path away first and just have them spliced together and then path away and have like a resistor for the rear headlight and then have a separate resistor inside here for the main headlight. And hopefully that makes a difference because they're separate, but they're still having, a 1 k ohm resistor, and they're pretty much the same LED anyways. So that should not cause any electricity to just only. I mean, once this is only activated, that one's off. So you can't just, it can't just still have power going to that when this is the only one that's on and this one's switched off because its forward headlight is moving forward. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, that's enough of that, LED problem that I'm having. All right, anyways, guys, this is Pensy Joe, and I'll see you guys in the next video down the road. Bye now.